make the best decisions. So what we do at the shelter, so let's take the Picardo Reception Center. We serve 250 people a night there, and when it gets really cold in inclement weather, we serve 350 people a night. We have anywhere from 5 to 8 staff, 3 shifts every day. We serve 240,000 meals out of that kitchen a year. So there's a lot going on. And we need to maintain order as much as we possibly can. So what we do is we decrease the barriers to shelter. We allow them to come in as long as they can care for their basic needs. You can be high, you can be drunk, but as long as you can function, you can stay. And what we find is that oftentimes people take care of themselves and people take care of others around them. There are times that it doesn't work, that somebody might be so challenged that they're unable to follow the basic rules, and at that point we have to ask them to leave. We've got 250 people and we're looking out for their safety. So it can be a challenge. Shelter and Housing First it's a little different. You have to be in a program to get Housing First. There has to be a voucher or a subsidy, and there has to be a unit. So when we look at shelter, we're looking at one night stay.
Thank you so very much. I'm going to go to Ray on this one and sort of, I did want to add, first of all, that in supportive housing, so for example, the supportive housing developments that are being built right now and approved by the Board of Supervisors in Santa Clara County, it's not that there aren't any rules. The individuals who live in supportive housing have to sign a lease, just like I have to sign a lease. And if they perpetually break the lease, they can be evicted. And so it's not as if there are no rules whatsoever. There is a housing first principle that we want to do whatever we can to keep people in housing. But it's not as if there's no rules for people to follow. And I'll sort of follow that on the supportive housing with Ray and ask, so once housed in Housing First, get in Housing First, but once housed, what's it take to make it work? Why is it even called supportive housing?
I mean, the structure of supportive housing is it's another term of art that we use in the industry. It's just housing at its core. Everyone who enters into affordable housing, enters into market rate housing, enters into supportive housing, they have a background check, they have criminal history screening, they go through all the process, they fill out an application, they do all of that work, and then they're a tenant of a landlord. In supportive housing, you have voluntary services that are attached. Because supportive housing typically serves chronically homeless people, folks that have a physical or mental disability and have been homeless for a while. So they can still live independently, but they may need additional help, and that's where supportive housing comes in. So there is a case manager or supportive housing subsidy attached to a unit, and there tends to be some sort of rental assistance or Section 8 voucher you've heard attached to the unit though. So there's ongoing help because they're living off of a basic income that they're never going to be able to increase for the most part. These are folks living on disabilities, Social Security, making $800, $1,000 a month at best. And keep in mind that these things have been pretty much flat for the last 20 years. They haven't grown with inflation over time, so people are still trying to live off of the basic safety net supports that were happening in the 1990s. So they're never going to survive in this community, and they need that additional support, and they need a rental subsidy. It's what makes it hard, but also what makes it possible. But if you ask, work, is this a strategy that has any bearing? I mean, you could look to a country that's implemented Housing First in Finland. There's been a lot of articles about it recently in the media. In 1987, there were 19,000 people living in shelters and on the streets in Finland. And today there's less than 6,000 people. And Finland's been implementing Housing First since 2007, and they've seen dramatic changes. But it's not just nonprofits or advocates or community members or any one group committed to this concept of Housing First. It takes the entire community. It really does take the proverbial village to move it forward and make it work, because there's no one agency that can make it work on its own. It requires the tribe.
Thank you so much, Ray. I'll come back to Robert on this one, and it's not just because we have the same name. Oh, by the way, you can call me Bob. You're just fine. So Housing First, we got into some of the core principles. There are 5 core principles. I'm going to read them so I don't mess it up. One is immediate access to permanent housing. Two is consumer choice, so sort of treating residents just like you would residents elsewhere. Three is orienting their care toward recovery. Four is client-driven and individualized support. And five is community and social integration. So four of those principles fall primarily with the county system of supportive housing, with the city, with direct service providers. But the fifth one, community integration, that has to do with responsibilities of more individuals. So I wanted to ask, what can we in the room do to help contribute, or other stakeholders and community organizations, how can we support that community integration that's needed?
Well, one thing I would say is the majority of people that really need this housing are not the people that you see in the streets. There's far more number of homeless people, or houseless people as I prefer to call them, that are working regular jobs, their families living in a car. There are people that are living 2 and 3 families in one unit. There are people that are renting out garages or little sheds here and there wherever they can. And there are people that are integrated into the community already. So for them, say a senior citizen that's on fixed income, who can no longer afford his rent, is now finds himself living outdoors. Well, those people are a lot easier to be able to move into housing because they don't have all the stigma, the social stigmas that most people consider when they think about houseless people. So this problem is huge. This is not just the people that you see underneath the freeway or under a bridge or out on the streets. This affects people that college graduates that have completed their education and they can't find a job. There's nothing for them here. Say you're an English major. You're not going to get hired by Google very well. So you're not going to get the kind of pay that's going to allow you to move into someplace. So we have a lot of people that are living right on the edge. And I think one of the things that we need to do is understand that not everybody requires this wraparound supportive services. Some people do. And the idea, if the community is much more accepting, then we're going to be able to bring in more areas. For example, I know right here in this district we have the furniture property that's going to be built into housing, and there's a lot of resistance to that because people get this idea that the people that are going to moving into this complex are all going to be drug crazed or sex crazed, and they're going to attack their children or their wives, and it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. As a matter of fact, the people that live in these communities typically become the victims because there are drug dealers that come to them to sell to them. There are prostitutes that come to them. There's all these other different elements that come in to try to, take advantage of these people. Elderly people, they get taken advantage because somebody comes along and decides they're going to take their money from them. And they're victims. They continue to be victimized. So I think we need to look at this completely different than how people tend to look at it now, as if, these are all just drug crazy people and, alcoholics, and they need all this support. Now, some of them do.
So it seems like to me you're commenting on the community support is needed at City Council when we're going to approve something, but it's also needed to have interaction. I wanted to ask Sandy if you could comment with individuals where they are, so we can help to create healthy neighborhoods for everybody who already lives there, as well as for new people who moved into the neighborhood. How can we be better about doing that?
Well, we need to get involved with homeless people, whether it's in a shelter setting, in a church, in a camp. Advocates need to be involved and have an exchange of views, an exchange of ideas. We need to help provide services. We need to, ordinary people have to get involved. That's one of the things. We have a tendency in society, sometimes we just write a check and give it to a nonprofit and don't pay any attention. That's really not going to work. We need to actually get involved. And not only get involved in serving people, but in advocating for people and with people. As I said before, I mean, we've got some moral problems in our society, but the moral problems are not primarily the people who are the poorest people in society. We have moral problems in Washington, D.C. We have moral problems in City Hall. We have moral problems in the County Board of Supervisors. We've got moral problems in Google, in Apple, in all of these companies which spend all their time going back to Washington, D.C. to lobby for billions of dollars of tax breaks while our people are continuing to suffer.
Thank you so much.
So we need to work together with homeless people to advocate. We can learn from homeless people, their stories, their ideas, and work together with them to change these structures. If we don't change these structures, we're wasting our time talking about ending homelessness. And actually, we've been talking about it. I think it began to be popular in 2001 when some guy in the Bush administration started talking about it. And we got more homelessness now than there was then. In 2005, I worked on a 10-year plan to end homelessness, and after 10 years, there was more homelessness. What we're doing is not working. They need to change.
One thing to sort of comment on both what Robert and Sandy were saying is that we not only have those who are living on the streets right now, but those who are in danger of becoming homeless. And the Measure A Affordable Housing Bond, for example, not only is for constructing housing that's permanent supportive housing for those who are living outside right now, but also focuses a lot of those resources on building housing for those with extremely low incomes. Because those are the ones who are closest to, I can't make the rent payment, I had a car accident, I have some health problem, and so we need to have more housing affordable for those individuals, and that's what we're working on, the county and the cities in our county as well. I'll go now to Ray, and I'm going to combine two really good audience questions here, because I think they get at a similar point. I'll read through them. If the problem is available housing, doesn't Housing First fail without more housing? Isn't the real problem reduction of federal funding, the resulting lack of construction of affordable housing? Wouldn't buying housing be more effective than building housing? And the other question is, can we avoid NIMBYism by nonprofit ownership of, I assume, land and housing?
Okay, that's a lot of questions. I'll start by saying that the federal government has never been meaningfully involved in the construction and the building of the housing for the most vulnerable residents in our community. I think that's a fact. Tax credit financing is the core of what we use from the feds to build affordable housing. And while it's a valuable resource and it does build a lot of affordable housing in the long run, it doesn't help to address our local problem in any meaningful way. And we haven't seen a reduction in that type of funding for a long time, and we've seen really flat funding out of HUD since about 1988. So the federal government has largely been absent on this, other than putting out plans and saying what they think is the best way to end homelessness in terms of best practice. So up until 2013, our community wasn't really doing anything specifically for homeless people and creating housing for formerly homeless individuals. We weren't. We had a pipe. During redevelopment, when all the money was flowing from the state for housing production, our city of San Jose, created 18,000 affordable housing units. Less than 100 of those units were set aside for people that were experiencing homelessness in that 18,000 pipeline production. In the last few years, there's 700 apartments that have been added to the pipeline because there's been a very intentional focus, and it takes intentionality. And the 2016 Measure A that the voters approved by about 2/3 of a percentage point, thank you very much, voted for Measure A, was the first time that we took a large sum of money, $700 million of the $950 million total, and said we were going to designate it specifically for supportive housing. So it's the first time we've ever had this trove of resources to develop this specific type of housing. The question about is it more affordable to buy housing as opposed to develop it? Nothing is affordable right now, but I think if you look at the market and you see an 800 square foot 2-bedroom house in Sunnyvale selling for $2.2 million we know that land and housing is out of reach. We need governments to find every piece of surplus land they have and say we're going to dedicate it specifically for this. We need more flexibility in our zoning code where we can take underutilized buildings like hotels and motels along the Monterey corridor and convert them into housing. We need to look at where we can acquire and rehab blighted buildings and make a change. So there's a lot of policies and a lot of work that can be done, but the cost of developing and building one apartment right now of supportive housing is about $650,000. Not only that, it's taking 5 to 7 years to get there. So we need to take the time down and we need to figure out how we can decrease the costs. And there are ways to do this, but it takes a great deal of political will and it takes a great deal of support and flexibility to find that. So I'm sorry I don't have an easy answer, but I can tell you that this is very much a local problem. And if we're going to solve this, we're going to have to act locally because I don't see a lot of help coming from outside of our community.
Thanks so much, Ray. Andrea, this question gets at something that I think is commonly a misconception, both for those who are working really hard to support the new housing that we need, as well as others who are more skeptical. It's an audience question, and it says, how many people benefiting from Housing First, truly become independent and get jobs?
I don't know about the job rate. I don't have that stat in my head, and I apologize. I do know 85% of the people that we're serving with the Housing First model get permanently housed in community and successfully stay there. Again, I'm not quite sure about the job rate. I can tell you that 33% of the people we serve at our Ricardo Reception Center are working people. And these are people who are capable of being placed in community quickly, but they need a place to save their money so they can find a place that they can stay. And we do our best to help them with that.
Thank you so much. You know, there are some statistics that really jumped out at me when I first got to know them here. One is that 62, I think, % of those who are experiencing homelessness today, this year in Santa Clara County, will be homeless for 11 months or less. So those who are homeless for a long period of time are in the minority. But it's also a misconception that supportive housing is intended to completely rehabilitate an individual to full community interaction. Right? There are individuals with a disabling condition that may never be able to work. There are others who will, right? And it's the entire spectrum of individuals, and they receive the services and care that's appropriate for them. But it's wrong to think that everyone can. Yes, please, go ahead.
So I have an example.
Thanks.
So I'm going to call her Sharon. We were able to place Sharon in a very affordable unit in San Martin. She has some mental health issues that stopped her from working. Although she's bright and she's capable. She's got 2 very disabled children. They're in their teens, they're extremely disabled, so she has to stay home and care for them. She was so grateful that she was given this opportunity to have permanent housing that she has taken it upon herself to tutor the children who are living at that property. Many of these parents have a couple of jobs, so it's hard to find childcare. So Sharon has stepped up. She provides childcare, she provides tutoring, and she came to me and asked if she can do an arts and crafts activity with the kids daily over the summer to keep them busy. This woman is giving all of her time and all of her talent, everything she has, to help the community that has given her a permanent place. And they actually call her Mom Sharon because she does so much for so many. So she's not capable of working, but she's capable of making a difference in her community.
Thank you so much. I'll come back to Robert on this next one, and I wanted to get to a little bit of the more immediate on this one. And so we've seen in the video, and our statistics locally show that 94% of those who are placed in supportive housing are successful there, and those statistics are between 85 and 95% across the nation. But so the model works, and we're building housing, and we've created thousands, literally, of new housing opportunities in recent years. But what do we do between now and then? What's missing? What are the gaps for additional services that are needed right now?
Okay, before I answer that question, I want to go back to the question that was asked for Ray. And I just want to say that the city of San Jose didn't sell this property to Google, but built housing on it. Or if they leased it to Google instead of selling it, they would still have that property. And after Google's through with it, after how many years they're going to be here, they would then be able to build more affordable housing. They would also be able to get more money over a longer period of time from charging them rent or from a lease. Then they would be able to use that money to then buy more affordable housing. But to your question, what do we do in the meantime? Well, I have an idea of and I've passed this before, Ray and a few others, is a concept for a sanctioned encampment. A sanctioned encampment would be a location where people would be able to come to, and in my version of it, it's a 3-level sanctioned encampment, where people at the first level would be able to come in and just have a safe place to sleep. It would be sanitary, safe, and sane. They could sleep there, they could get something to eat when they first come in, they go and they sleep for 8 to 10 hours. When they get up, they get to get another meal, and then they go off and about their business. But it's very important for people to be able to have a safe place to sleep. You can imagine if you, every night you had to wonder what was going to happen to all your property, what was going to happen to you, somebody might come out and do something to you. So this is very, very important for people to be able to get, out of survival mode and to be able to start improving their lives. The second level would be people that would be working on any kind of goal that they may have. They may want to go back to school, they may want to get their kids back, they may want to get a driver's license or get a job or whatever. And those people at the second level will then be able to have an opportunity to be able to stay there. They would have a permanent place for themselves as long as they continue working on their goal. And then they could possibly move to the third level. The third level are people that are much more ahead on their goals. So these are people that are probably ready to move into permanent housing. But they would be the ones that would be running the encampment. And the encampment would be safe and secure, would be fenced off. And those people would then have an opportunity to be able to learn leadership skills. They would be able to learn organizational skills. They would be able to get certain training to be able to go and get jobs. We would provide them the kinds of services that they need. We'd be able to bring in, say HomeFirst would be able to send their case managers over, and they would know where the people were. We wouldn't have to go looking for them. When the medical people treat someone, they would have a safe place for them to stay so that they know, when they need to come back and check on their bandages or whatever treatment they need, they would be there. People would be in a place where they could recover and work their way into permanent housing. Because right now it's just a grab bag. You never know who's going to be coming through the door, and you want to be able to make sure that you have people that are successful, but at the same time, people don't evaporate. People continue to live in the streets, they continue to live homeless or houseless in any way that they can, and they need an opportunity to be able to find a safe, sane, sanitary place where they can get all these different services, and that's my recommendation.
Thank you so much, Robert. How are we doing out there? Everybody still awake? Okay, you doing okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure. I don't want to lose anybody.
Oh, by the way, if anybody wants a copy of the plan, it's on the table out there. You want to see how it works.
And I think a lot of people got really useful resources by the door, so make sure you stop at the table before we leave. But I want to follow up on, especially with Sandy, the last thing you said, Robert, about leadership training and what sounds like sort of getting people more involved civically. And this is an excellent audience question. It says, how can we empower those people experiencing homelessness as well as low-income families? How can we make council members accountable for the current housing crisis?
Okay, those are both, actually, the answer to one is the answer to the second.
There you
Two
go.
parts. And it does come from empowerment. And the way to empower people, we have got to get people involved in advocating for their future. There's a service provider model, which, with all due respect to service providers, but which is that we do things for people. But what really needs to do, we need to organize people to do things for themselves, and particularly to advocate for themselves. And I know in the shelter, which we had at First Christian Church, that was one of our guiding principles, was to educate people about the housing crisis, about the issues of affordable housing in San Jose, about what needed to be done. And we would march, and that was before they built the new city hall, we'd march that mile from where our church was down to the old city hall and speak up at city council meetings and organize people to speak repeatedly to the city council members and just hammer them, because they need to be hammered, because they get hammered every day by real estate developers. They need to be hammered by the people that are the victims of the real estate developers. And so we would do that. It was extremely effective in a lot of different respects. I know one of the policies that we fought for way back then, and this was in 2001, the City Affordable Housing Fund, 2% of the funds were devoted to what's called extremely low-income housing. And that's housing which is affordable, roughly, say, for people making $30,000 a year or less, which would be all the people that were homeless fit into that category. So we actually would work with and educate the people that stayed in the shelter to chant at City Hall, ELI, 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 because that's what was needed. And finally, after a couple of years, the City Council actually changed its policy from 2% ELI up to 30% ELI. So it can be done, and that's helpful to the people that are advocating, and it's also helpful to the community for getting a better policy implemented. And so I definitely agree with that.
Thanks so much, Sandy. I'll move over to Andrea on this one. This is also from the audience, and I'll warn you ahead of time. It's a two-parter. They're related. This says, I've been homeless for 3.5 years. Not everyone is a criminal, drug addict, or has a mental health issue. What resources are there for those people immediately? What immediate resources? So that's the first one. And the follow-up to that, if I'm understanding this correctly, is if maybe you could say a little bit more about what are the supportive services in supportive housing that address those issues?
Okay, so let me first start by saying the state or challenge of homelessness is idiosyncratic. So for every single individual, they have their own story and their own needs, and they are unique and independent. So we need a continuum of care that can address those needs, whether it's safe parking, safe encampments like Robert was addressing, whether it's bridge housing, interim housing communities, whether it's emergency shelter and supportive housing. So services for supportive housing. We're looking at wraparound service. This is an individual that Ray mentioned earlier is not the majority. It's the minority individual. It's the individual who needs mental health as well as case management. They need somebody to check in with them weekly. They need somebody to help them with communication skills and mediation skills, learn how to be part of a community again. These are people that can do it successfully with the right supports, and it tends to be a wraparound. Again, not everybody's going to need medication, but everybody might need case management. So it's idiosyncratic. And to address the issue of homelessness now, currently, it's unfortunate there aren't enough services. I'm going to be really clear about that. And we don't have enough services. So anybody can go to the Picardo Reception Center at 3:30 and get in line and try to get an available bed. Is it an answer permanently? No. We have limited case management. But what you can do is you can ask to be put on the outreach bed list. We do have a wait list. We currently have 42 beds associated with the outreach program. You can stay with us for up to 3 months. We will provide case management. We will do our best to help you figure out your benefits, what benefits are available to you, help you get the right health services that you need, and we'll do our best to try to find you a place to live and a job. We also have a working persons program. So if this individual is working right now, they can come to the shelter, they can say that they have a job, they can show proof with a pay stub, and you can stay with us for up to 6 months. You can get 3 meals a day, you can come and go as you need to according to your job, and you can save your money so that you can get a room to rent out there. Those are some of the basic services that we have available right now. Did I get it?
You got it. Thank you so much. Excellent. I'll come back to Ray on this one, and this is a short one, but it's important as I don't think that we have covered it yet. And the question is simply, does the City of San Jose and the County of Santa Clara support Housing First?
Yeah. I mean, so both the County of Santa Clara and the City of San Jose support the Housing First model. Absolutely. They've adopted, each jurisdiction has adopted it.
However, I want to go back to Sandy's chant of ELI. There is supporting a model, and then there's supporting the strategy behind it to fund. So next month, the city of San Jose is going to be looking at its housing investment plan. That's how it invests all of its housing resources for the next 5 years. So that methodology is critical to how they're going to build housing. I think it's absolutely critical that the city adopt a policy that prioritizes the development of housing and the funding of housing for the most vulnerable residents. And in the pressure to build more housing units, to reach goals, to hit targets, that can be overlooked. So, I think for this, the county has passed Measure A and is backing up the Housing First methodology with this bonded funding. I think the city has a great opportunity next month to say for the next 5 years, the city is going to absolutely prioritize development of housing for the Housing First model that can work to change people's lives. But it is a point in time. It's worth everybody being aware of, and it's worth keeping Sandy's chant in mind.
I want to follow up on that directly with Sandy, if I could get you to comment. And the question I would have then is, with these kind of challenges that need a focus on extremely low income ELI housing, as well as the supportive housing for those experiencing homelessness, and in the context of a housing crisis that has become, from what I can tell, the largest sort of headline almost every single day across the state. So how can I, who works for a nonprofit organization that's focused on ending homelessness, and you, the president of the Affordable Housing Network in Santa Clara County, and Andrea, who works for HomeFirst, how can we better collaborate together to make sure we join forces and we aren't dividing, that we're actually uniting in order to get these things that seem to be very similar in terms of the goals? Are there better ways to collaborate and work together?
Well, I think we should collaborate as much as we can. Some of that, again, it comes down to taking on special interests, and not everybody is in a position to do that. I've always been very blessed because I've worked for a ministry with no budget and a nonprofit which has no budget, so I've actually been free to speak my mind. And one thing I would advocate, for example, which I'm not sure everyone can do, is go down to these hearings they're holding about the Google project. The next one is on May 23rd at 6 p.m. in City Hall, and speak out as Robert said. Why shouldn't that land be used to house the homeless and to build housing? Why are we giving it to a corporation to make whatever they do, sell ads on the internet? That's not a productive use of that land. It's not meeting human needs. So we need to get together and advocate. I think we should cooperate as much as we can. Not everybody wants to go out and criticize Google. Well, that's all right, I understand that, but the people who can should.
Thank you so much, Sandy. I'll move on to Robert, and I'll go back to an audience question. This one is, in 1978, there were several hundred homeless people. I assume that means living here. Why do we think that there's so many more people today who need these supportive housing programs we're talking about?
Well, for one, as Ray pointed out, there's not much housing being built, and this population has grown. San Jose is not the same population that it was in the 70s. So you have more people